if you do meditation, you're going to mind wander. Even like expert monks, who go on retreat, maybe they get to a trance state of some kind where they don't mind wander for an hour or two. But even like on 3-year retreats, they don't mind wander most of the time. You can't stop mind wandering.
Keep watching to learn more. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we will be exploring the phenomenon of mind wandering. My guest is Arnaud Delorme, who is a university professor at Paul Sabatier University in Toulouse, France. He is also an adjunct faculty member at the Schwarz Center for Computational Neuroscience at the University of California, San Diego, and he is a consulting research scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. His research has focused on pure neuroscience methods as well as on the neuroscience of mind wandering, meditation, and so-called mediums. He is the author of Why Our Minds Wander. Understand the science and learn how to focus your thoughts. Arnaud is in San Diego, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Arnaud. It is a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You've been focusing on the phenomenon of mind wandering and doing it from the perspective of neuroscience, which I would think is particularly difficult because, at least from my perspective, and please correct me if you see it differently, neuroscience has had a very, very difficult time pinning down how the mind works in connection with the brain.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I started getting interested in mind wandering 25 years ago. And it's mostly when I started to meditate myself. And then I noticed my mind is wandering everywhere. And this wasn't really addressed, in the scientific literature. There was a little bit on daydreaming in psychology. Jonathan Schooler was starting to do some experiments at UC Santa Barbara. But there was, not much. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun and interesting just to put that as a topic for my research?
It's a fascinating topic, and it's universal. Everybody's mind wanders. So you would think it would be very basic to psychology, but even the language around it, when we talk about the mind wandering, it implies as if the mind itself is moving around to different parts of the brain. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, to some extent. Internalization, we talk more about, internalization and externalization. Sometimes you're paying attention to events, environments, and sometimes you're paying attention to your own thoughts. And so mind wandering is a little bit like that. It's jumping from topics to topics. And it is fascinating. One reason I think that not that many people were interested in it was people didn't know even it existed. It's like only when you pinpoint, well, when you're reading, sometimes you read one page and then you don't remember, you have to go back. That's what mind wandering is. But 20 years ago, you talk to scientists or, lay people in the street, they would understand daydreaming. But yeah, mind wandering was a foreign concept, which is, I think, one of the reasons it wasn't studied before is just because it's very subtle.
You have to define mind wandering in the context of some task that you're supposed to be doing that you're wandering away from.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're meditating, you're supposed to count your breath and your mind. And so, that's also why I became interested in mind wandering, because mind wandering is central in meditation. That's what you do half the time. At least that's what I do half the time when I meditate. And so that brings your attention right to, okay, here you're not focused on what you're supposed to do. Also in meditation, it's more subtle than that. You're supposed to pay attention, whether it's mind wandering or not mind wandering. It's like you don't want to, say this is good meditation, bad meditation. So, there's some caveat about meditation, but this is a place where mind wandering is prominent. It's like if you do meditation, you're going to mind wander. Even like expert monks, will go on retreat. Maybe they get to a trance state of some kind where they don't mind wander for an hour or two. But even like on 3-year retreats, they'll mind wander most of the time. You can't stop mind wandering.
I find that it's almost impossible for me to concentrate one-pointedly for more than 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. And why is that? There's many potential explanations to mind wandering, which we might go into these. I don't know.
Well, I would assume that it has evolutionary reasons for existing. If I'm some small animal out on the savannah in Africa, I can't pay too much attention to any one task for too long because there's always a risk of predators.
The prioritization of the different tasks. Yeah, you want to disengage from your task, reevaluate, okay, what's the most important task I should do right now? And then, re-engage. You don't want to be stuck in one task. Like there is this, if we were not mind wandering, for example, and you're watching a very long movie, that's very, it's very interesting. Well, you might stop feeding yourself. You won't like reprioritize. Okay, now I need to eat something because I'm starting to mind wander about food. So it has an evolutionary advantage, in that way for sure. But the mystery remains. Like if we want to concentrate, like we tell ourselves, okay, I'm going to concentrate here for 10 minutes, and you just can't do that. After, as you said, after 30 seconds, you'll start thinking about something else.
In spite of the fact that we can't hold our attention for very long at all, people are capable of writing novels and building skyscrapers and engaging in long-term projects that require focused attention.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting part because, it's not because you're mind wandering that you're necessarily, you can't focus. So I think, that's a message to tell, your audience, it's okay to mind wander. And, there's pathological mind wandering where you mind wander too much. And also we're all on the gradient. I was doing these experiments in the lab and I was asking, so I had students and, just put them in a room asking them, okay, just press a button whenever you're mind wandering. It was a little bit more, elaborate than that, but that was the message. And then I had students, they stayed in the room for 2 hours. They never pressed the button. It's like, I never mind wander. and so, the subjective experience is quite different. Also, when you're mind wandering, and your task is, for example, to pay attention to something, you can convince yourself, oh, I wasn't really mind wandering. So you start, so it's very, very subtle. This mind wandering is not like you go completely on a tangent and then completely lose attention in what you're doing, although that is possible. But, very often you continue to be engaged in the task. Like, for example, driving. We can think about other things when we're driving. And, that's a type of mind wandering. We actually, in, our experiments, we differentiate 3 levels of mind wandering. Either you're fully engaged in the task, you have an intermediate states where you're in between mind wandering and engaged in the task, and a state where you're fully mind wandering. And we're looking, our science, the science part is to look at transition between these states.
There are certainly occasions where people will deliberately mind wander. If you're, for example, doing a brainstorming exercise, you want your mind to sort of veer off in unexpected ways.
Yeah, and, it is debated in the scientific community whether there's 2 camps. There's camp which says, oh, this is a type of mind wandering. And there's another camp which says, oh, no, this is voluntary. So it's not mind wandering. Mind wandering has to be involuntary. And from my perspective, it's like there is these are just thoughts that pop up in your brain. And some are more voluntary than others, but it's more like continuum. It's not like fully voluntary or fully involuntary. Like, if you hear, a fire truck and you think about fire, is it voluntary or non-voluntary? I mean, you heard something in your environment that, triggered some thoughts. So yeah, the line is blurred between, what's fully voluntary thoughts and what's fully involuntary thoughts. You hear birds chirping outside and you think of your childhood, in your grandmother's garden, they were birds. Is it voluntary or involuntary? It's triggered by the environment.
As a neuroscientist talking about human experience, you're already on very, very shaky grounds. I wonder, for example, how does a neuroscientist define a thought?
Then we're going into ontologies, which is more like beliefs. So I have my own beliefs, what are thoughts? I believe, consciousness is just where thoughts occur. So consciousness is the content of the thoughts. When you're meditating and the mind is quiet, there might be no thoughts. It's like a pond, calm pond, and you're at peace. And then thoughts bubble up, maybe basically to the surface. And you can see them as disturbing. Okay, they're disturbing my meditation. But in some meditation tradition, they're actually a good thing. Like in transcendental meditation, the thoughts which bubble up is they're releasing their energy. So you need to let them bubble up. And it's actually, if you were mind wandering all the time during your meditation, it's a good thing. You let a lot of thoughts bubble up. There's different perspective on thoughts, how you define thoughts.
You're using the metaphor of bubbling up like bubbles in a can of soda or a bottle of soda, so you can see the bubbles emerging out of the liquid. But I would imagine from a neuroscience perspective, there are no bubbles at all.
There's probably no bubbles. I mean, thoughts is... So, it's that's why they're very interesting thoughts, is because they are, neurocorrelates. For example, you're thinking of a dog. Well, I can put some electrodes in your brain, in the dog neuron, that's going to light up. But also these are subjective, thoughts we experience. And so we have, that's really at the boundary, it's like mind and matter, it's like thoughts are really there, right there on the edge of a mind-matter interaction. So it's very interesting, but also, controversial topic. I personally believe that, which is not what most mainstream scientists would think, but, that your personal experience is primary, because you can be dreaming this whole world, but at least you're here dreaming the whole world. So your experience is primary. So my experience of the thoughts are primary. And then I can make neuroscience stories, how the thoughts occur in the brain. But it doesn't negate my experience, which is something I'm more sure of than, what happens in the brain. What happens in the brain depends on, decades of studies and papers and people doing all these experiments. What's happened in my subjective experience, I can tap into it right now.
Your subjective experience is unique to you. It is private. It has qualities that are difficult to express in scientific or mathematical terms. And if we assume, as you just stated, that your subjective experience is primary, people often argue that it's not as if the mind is in the brain. It's more like the brain is in the mind.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, these are so that's, our scientific hypothesis. Our scientific hypothesis, at the Institute of Noetic Sciences is that the consciousness is primary, or at least on par with matter. I think, some scientists would debate, that specific topic. But yeah, we can't negate, the first person experience.
You do spend a lot of time in your book talking about the fact that it is possible to learn how to have a measure of control over mind wandering, that we're not really the total victim of wherever our mind chooses to go, that we have a measure of responsibility for where our thoughts go.
Yeah, and I don't think I use the word control because, control means like, I'm going to stop mind wandering and it's going to happen. And for me, I see, it's like you can tune mind wandering, with exercises. So you have to be dedicated. So it's like sports. You can think about running, but that's not going to, increase your cardio. And then, so same thing about mind wandering. You can think about stopping to mind wander, and that's going to have zero effect whatsoever. If anything, you're going to be upset that you can't stop mind wandering. So yeah, it's more getting into noticing, and retraining basically your brain through meditation or other exercises. In my book, I have like many different exercises people can use, which are all inspired by meditation. And I think the crux of all these exercise is to realize you're not your thoughts, detaching from your thoughts, and not because if you're attached to your thoughts, in general, being attached to your thoughts, makes you unhappy. So, so you can detach from your thoughts, and it's okay to mind wander as long as, it doesn't disrupt your day. Most people will have pathological mind wandering, like, for example, rumination during depression. That's a type of mind wandering. You rehearse the same thoughts, negative thoughts. You can't get out of the loop. These can be addressed with some of these techniques.
You mentioned athletics, and that you can't become a better athlete just by thinking about it. But I'm under the impression that there are schools of athletics, which is exactly what they do. They practice visualizing, for example, the perfect basketball shot or something. And then if they can visualize it perfectly, they find that it's actually easier to do physically.
Having the thoughts, I'm going to increase my cardio. It doesn't work like that. So it's this, I think it's this, because this is a type of exercise now they're doing. They're doing some kind of training. So same thing with mind wandering. You're retraining your brain, but, it's over repetition and, some level of effort you put into it. It's just not a thought that crosses your brain. Oh, I'm going to stop mind wandering.
One of the physiological facts you do point out in your book is related to the default mode network of the brain. And I found that fascinating because, of course, when I was a young person studying physiological psychology, nobody ever talked about the default mode network or about any networks at all in the brain. This is a whole new way of thinking about the brain, I gather.
Yeah, and this really emerged about 20 years ago. So basically, the default mode network, it's using these scanners. So, if you go to a hospital, you go to these big magnets, they're scanners, and that can detect blood flow. And so 20 years ago, some researcher realized, well, there is something happening in the brain when people do nothing, and which came as a surprise, even though this seems obvious. But, this is what they call the default mode network. It's like what's happening in the brain when people do nothing. And that's very related to mind wandering because, when people do nothing, basically you think about random things. And so, that's a form of mind wandering. And since then, the default mode network, mind wandering, resting states of the brain, has been a major topic in neuroscience.
The default mode network being sort of the resting state of the brain or the mind.
Exactly. Although, it can be different things for different people. Like, for example, for very experienced meditators, you ask them to do nothing and they go into your meditation, so it would be very different from, just some other person who just start thinking about random things. And then even when you're resting, it depends on your day. You had a good day. You're going to be very relaxed and maybe not have a high density of thoughts. Or you have a very bad day and your mind is going to race. So the default mode network is just a bucket, where we just put everything. Then you have to differentiate it.
Well, I gather that unlike the way I was taught about the brain when I was younger, that there are locations in the brain. The default mode network isn't like a single location. It's more like a group of locations interacting with each other.
Yeah, it's so different part of the brain, some frontal areas, some more central areas, and some more parietal areas, which are all talking to each other when you're doing nothing, basically. And part of this is linked to mind wandering. Part of this is also linked to, the prioritization of task, where you're mind wandering, you realize you're mind wandering. So now that's no longer mind wandering. You just realize you're mind wandering. And then you start thinking about something else and you start to mind wander again. So it's all these networks. And that's just one of the network. There's the salience network. Once you experience something salient, it's going to redirect your attention. So that's another network. Visual network, auditory network. So, there's, different types of network.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that in neuroscience these days, let's say in the last decade or two, we're developing whole new ways of thinking about how the brain works.
Yeah, I think we're more creative these days, that we were like 20 years ago. So, definitely, so 50 years ago, we're in the dark ages. It's like it was the behaviorism. Behaviorism is the brain is a black box. And, it's like anyone who was trying to do cognitive science, so trying to, look at people's cognition beyond just behavior, it's like you couldn't get an academic job. And then, in the 1980s, we got the rise of cognitive neuroscience, where, cognition was considered. And then in the year 2000, it became okay to study, states like meditation. But it wasn't before, or talk about consciousness. Before the year 2000, it was very taboo. You were risking your career by talking about consciousness. I remember one of the first experiments I did, and I just had people sitting in the room counting their breath and pressing a button whenever they lost the count of their breath. And, people in my department thought I was crazy. What are you doing? Like, this is not even an experiment. We show pictures. We show, but now it's very well accepted. Like there's hundreds of, researchers doing this kind of experiment. So we have evolved quite a lot also in terms of, the organization of the brain and how we study the communication of the different brain areas.
The measurement of blood flowing into different parts of the brain so that you can tell through the blood flow whether certain parts of the brain are more active or less active than other parts of the brain when a person is engaged in any particular task.
Yeah, exactly. And, these days with AI, you can almost see, what people are thinking in real time. You have the concept, so you have people watching movies, and you can see some concept lighting up. So you might know, oh, they're watching a dog right now, and someone enters, etc. So you won't get the whole picture, but you get a fairly good pictures of decoding brain in real time.
Would you say that when the mind wanders, it's as if the mind is a point in space and it travels to different portions of the brain? Is that in any way an apt metaphor?
Yeah, when the mind wanders, there's definitely some neural correlates. I wouldn't say, you travel. I would say more it's like the different brain areas become coupled, than when you're not mind wandering. That's how I would phrase it. But also, I wouldn't discard, the first person experience. You first experience mind wandering, as yourself. Then we're making inference. Oh, that's what happens in the brain. Truth is, we don't know yet exactly what happens in the brain because these are very hard to study. It's all based on people's report. I was mind wandering. So we were doing experiment, when people, they press a button when they're mind wandering. And then the way we try to infer what's happening in the brain is we look before. So before they press the button, they're just distracted. They're mind wandering. And then after they press the button, they realize, oh, I was not thinking of counting my breath. And now they reconcentrate. So we compare the brain activity before and after. And that's how we infer that's what's linked with mind wandering. But it always starts from the first person experience. So it doesn't start like, oh, we're going to look at the brain and we know what happens. We're looking at the brain. We have no idea what happens. So it's all about getting the proper label. And in that case, the label are people's subjective experience.
Well, when a person pushes the button in your experiments, it means that they are now aware of the fact that their mind was wandering. That would be, I think, considered a form of metacognition.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's what we call metaconscious event. And that's a very, very interesting state. That's cultivated also during, meditation. You're trying to pay attention to what happens in your own mind. When you're meditating, your task. I'm trained in Zen meditation, and the technique was just sitting. So you just sit and you observe what happens in your mind, and so that cultivates the meta awareness. Being aware of your own thinking, and some experiments I did. And others did as well, is to show that advanced meditators tend to mind wander less often than naive subjects. So it does help with mind wandering.
You describe a cycle that people go through. First, they're concentrating, they're applying their attention to a task at hand. Then the mind wanders. Then they become aware that the mind is wandering. And then they focus again back on the task. So the cycle keeps repeating itself, I gather.
That's where it's interesting because we give some attribute to thoughts like the momentum of the thought. How much momentum the thought has. So, if we're imagining it as bubble, at the beginning, there might be little bubbles and then you're getting, oh, this thought, it's like, this thought is very interesting. I'm very either happy or upset about the thing. Let me just get embedded 100%. Then you have lots of bubbles, and then it loses momentum, a little bit less bubble, and then you'll realize, oh, I was not, driving, washing the dishes, meditating. I was doing something else. I was having that thought. But it is associated from the subjective perspective to the thought losing some momentum, or, you can call it energy.
Some people, I think, would even go so far as to identify mind wandering with having an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, it's a type of disembodiment in the sense that, when you're really embedded in your mind wandering, you stop paying attention to, what's going outside. If you look at people's eyes when they're mind wandering, they just might be looking up or something. And you're getting out of your body, embodied experience into this mental space, and then you come back.
So it does seem like a process that, in spite of our best efforts to hold our mind steady and to concentrate, we're going to keep mind wandering. It's almost like breathing, I suppose. There's a natural cycle, or the heartbeat. You're going to go in, you're going to go out. It's just a cycle that human beings go through.
That's the very good description. It's a cycle we go through. We don't know for sure the function of that cycle. Like for, breathing, we know the function. Like if we stop breathing, we die. For mind wandering, we don't know exactly the function. We talked about evolutionary advantage. There's also research that shows it's a type of microsleep during the day. You're engaged, and then you're starting to mind wander, daydreaming, basically, and then it helps also do, clean waste in the brain. Like when you're sleeping, there's cleaning waste in the brain. So it's a type of rest, light rest of your brain. So that has, this function. And then there is also, creativity, when you're like, there's experiments that show that, if I ask you a question, and then I either give you something very engaging for the next 2 minutes, or just give you nothing where you can mind wander, you're going to be more creative after 2 minutes about the question I ask you. If I ask you, okay, I give you a brick. What can you do with that brick? Find like hundreds of things you can do with that brick. Paperweight, build a house, etc. You're going to be more creative if I let you mind wander, and you're spontaneously going to find more solution. So there's this advantage, but on the other side of things, there's this whole literature that shows that, they compared people, so you get on your smartphone, you get text message. What are you doing right now? Are you focused on what you're doing, not focused on what you're doing? And how are you feeling? And there's a very strong correlation between mind wandering and not being happy in the moment. Whatever you're doing, you can be mind wandering about your next vacation. It's going to be worse than if you're paying attention to what you're doing right now. So if you're walking in the forest and you're just in the forest, happy to be there, you're going to be more happy than if you're thinking about your next vacation, wherever it might be. But it's the same for potentially unpleasant tasks as well. You're less happy when you're mind wandering, even if it's pleasant mind wandering.
I find for myself that often if my mind is wandering, I will remember a moment when I treated somebody else badly. And then I feel bad. Why did I do that? But I usually try to take the time when that happens to, in my own way, to send healing to that person who I treated badly as a way to kind of make up for it. So I see it as an opportunity for me to do a little mental house cleaning, like to dig out those little places. You could say it's almost like popping a mental pimple or something to remember a bad feeling and then try to heal it in some way.
It's a great approach to, noticing your thoughts and doing something about them. And also, it's like a lot other studies showed that the content of your mind wandering, it's like dreaming. It depends what you've experienced during the day. So, like, personally, one thing I do is I limit drastically, the type of news I watch, because then I know I'm going to mind wander about it, either be upset or and yeah, it's not something I want in my mental space, that I think is beneficial to me. So, I limit the type of information my mind can grab.
Today, with the highly polarized political environment that we live in, a lot of people are doing exactly that. They turn the news off because they don't want to have to be ruminating all the time on the fact that, we have a felon in the White House.
And there's a cognitive, reason also for polarizing news. It's like, it's just grab the attention better. So, that's what advertisers want. They want to grab your attention. So they're going to make up stories, usually bad stories. I don't know if you know that Zen story of, it's someone and they break their leg and they have to go to hospital, and then their neighbor says, "Oh, you're so unlucky, you just broke their leg." And then they spend the night at the hospital and there's a landslide and their house is basically destroyed. And it's like, "Oh, you're so lucky you were not in your house." So yeah, I like to think of fate, it's like, and that helps me, to tune down, the thoughts when I'm upset about, these politicians or these other politicians, or being less polarized. And also, I also like to acknowledge the humanity in everyone, even, extreme right, extreme left, supporters. They are humans. They have feeling. They love their family. I don't know. There's a lot of things we have in common.
Ruminating over an unfortunate situation, whether it's a fantasy or a real life situation, is probably not the healthiest way to spend your time.
The rumination is very interesting because, with the, at least, the way I experience it, you're attached to your rumination to some extent. So you don't want to let it go. And so, some of the technique I put in my, in the book is realizing it doesn't serve you. I like the work by Byron Katie, where, you just, imagine how you would feel without that thought and realizing I would be so happy if I don't have that thought. And then you realize, and then you stop having that thought naturally because you've realized deep down, okay, this is not serving me. This is not making me happy. So yeah, we have control in our lack of control. Whenever we realize at a deeper level, this is serving me or this is not serving me, we have the power to stop it, but it's not easy. We need to really want it.
I find for myself, it's what seems to work is a kind of gentle pressure that I can put on my own thoughts. If I try to force it, I will never have this thought again. Well, then it's going to for sure come back. But if I just sort of gently ignore it, it'll probably go away.
What you're saying is like, don't think of the pink elephant for the next 5 minutes. The only thing you're gonna think about is the pink elephant. So yeah, it doesn't work to repress thoughts, and that's in that sense. I said, well, you can't control your thoughts, but you can become friends with your thoughts, and especially the ones which are upsetting you, and let them not take all your mental space, basically. But you have to do the work.
I would imagine as a neuroscientist that a thought, it would be considered part of a chain of associations that occurs when different aspects of the brain are communicating with each other. That would be very different from esoteric circles in which a thought itself is considered to be a spiritual entity.
So I think you can see it both ways. I mean, for example, in our experiments, we look at, so mind wandering, we ask people, okay, what were you thinking? What's the content of your thinking? And then we look for chains. Okay, there's like, you were mind wandering 10 minutes ago. Does what you're mind wandering about now related to what you were mind wandering 10 minutes ago? And most often not. There is no strong correlation. Within one thought, there might be strong correlation. You think of going to the grocery store and then you were seeing your friend at the grocery store, etc. So it's the same kind of thoughts, but it has different parts. So within one thought, you do have strong association, but across different mind-wandering episodes, which occurs, as you say, every 30 seconds to 1 minute and a half, then, you have no potential association. So that also informs, I think, the spiritual aspect, when you're looking at your own internal, mind wandering, when you're meditating, basically you're studying yourself, mind wandering. That's how I see, a big part of the meditation is studying, your brain patterns. So science, and statistics can inform, the way you look at your own brain pattern. The two are linked.
Arnaud, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've learned a great deal about how my own mind works. I'm very grateful to you. I'm happy to introduce your work to the New Thinking Aloud audience. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to learning about more of your research as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.